Claire Matthews was 19 years old. A beautiful girl, in the age of physical development. The age that people often compare to a newly blooming flower. 3 months ago, her grandfather, Eugene Matthews, had a stroke. After the emergency, he was left with only half of his body and became strangely irritable. None of his relatives lived nearby. Claire's mother had left long ago, and her father had never existed in the family story. She was the only one who could come back to take care of him. Claire did not say a word to her friends. She refused the scholarship interview at her favorite photography school, quickly stuffed her camera into her backpack, and took the earliest bus back to her hometown, the place she had left when she was 8. When the bus stopped at the last small gas station, Claire got off, her back covered in dust. A middle-aged man driving a truck was waiting. It was Roy Parker, the only neighbor still living near her grandfather's house. He nodded to her, silently loading the luggage into the trunk. No one asked. Mr. Eugene's wooden house appeared behind the pines, small, old, with a sagging porch and a broken swing hanging precariously. The sky above was heavy, as if it were pressing down on everything. Claire walked up the steps, each step echoing a distant memory, her grandmother's voice calling from the kitchen. Her laughter as a child. The incessant ticking of the clock on the wall. Mr. Eugene sat in his wheelchair, facing the window, not reacting when Claire opened the door and entered. His cheeks were sunken, his eyes deep and cold. The house smelled of time and of loneliness. "I'm home, Grandpa," Claire said softly. Mr. Eugene didn't look at her. His eyes were still fixed on the empty space outside the glass, where the old oak tree was shedding its leaves. Claire took off her coat, hung it on a hook, walked into the kitchen, and turned on the faucet. The sound of dripping water broke the silence. The first dinner passed in silence. Claire served omelets and boiled broccoli. He didn't touch his chopsticks. He only said one sentence, "I don't eat bland food." She bit her lip, clearing the dishes without replying. The night grew colder. Claire lay on the creaky wooden bed, her mother's old room. She stared at the ceiling, replaying his words from that afternoon in her head. "I don't eat bland food." Although she had prepared herself for the hardships, Claire still felt a lump in her throat. Not because of the words, but because he was no longer the person she remembered. A familiar, tick-tock sound rang out from the living room. The old clock on the wall, a large wooden clock like the grandfather clock, with Roman numerals and a gently swinging gold pendulum. It was still working perfectly, as it had when she was a child. Every hour, it rang out a long bell, echoing in the space filled with memories. Claire pulled the blanket up, her eyes glued to the darkness. She felt like she had just entered a world with no exit, where time did not die, but only slowed down in a persistent ticking sound. The next morning, Claire made tea, put it on a tray, and brought it into the living room. Mr. Eugene was still sitting in the same position, only the light coming through the window was different. She bent down to tie his slippers. "Do you need anything else?" she asked. He glanced at her. "I need some quiet." Claire nodded. She said nothing more, but instead of leaving, she sat down on the chair next to him, opened the camera, and cleaned the lens. He looked at her from the corner of his eye, then turned away. The antique clock behind him chimed 9 a.m. Claire raised her head, smiling slightly, the first smile since returning. Claire woke to the familiar smell of mold and the sound of the clock striking 7. She put on her coat, walked out of the room, and quietly prepared breakfast. Eggs, toast, some sliced fruit, a simple menu that she thought Mr. Eugene would find easy to eat. On the tray, she placed a cup of black coffee. No sugar, no milk. She remembered that preference from her childhood, when she had secretly tasted his coffee and grimaced at the bitterness. She carried the tray into the living room. He was already sitting in his wheelchair, his eyes still looking out the window, where the oak trees were still shedding their yellow leaves, as if not caring about her presence. "I made some breakfast. You try it," Claire said, gently placing the tray on the table. He didn't react, didn't glance, didn't answer. Claire sat down on the chair next to him, took a fork, and cut the eggs in half. "I know you like your coffee black," she said, as if to herself. "Leave it," he interrupted. "I can do it myself." Claire looked at him, then quietly put down her fork. A pang of pain ran through her, but she didn't let it escape into words. After a wordless breakfast, Claire cleaned the house. The wooden house wasn't big, but it was in disrepair. The tiles were peeling, the carpet was musty, and the smell of damp and old staleness hung in every corner. She opened the window wide to let the sunlight in. When she went to the bathroom to change her towels, she heard a broken call from the living room. "Claire, come here." She hurried over. He was in a wheelchair, his face tense. He needed to go to the bathroom, and he couldn't stand up. "Give me a minute, I'll help," she said, gently lifting him to his feet with all her might. He stiffened, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the handrails. It was obvious he hated this, but he couldn't refuse. As Claire wrapped her arms around him, helping him into the bathroom, she heard him say softly, as if through gritted teeth, "How humiliating." Claire paused for a second, about to say something, but swallowed her words back. She just squeezed his hand lightly. That afternoon, Claire went out to the backyard, which had been a place of childhood memories. The wooden fences were broken. The grass was knee-high. The swing was covered with vines. She took out her camera, took a few pictures. The late autumn light was as beautiful as an oil painting. She always found peace through the lens. There was no harsh voice, no cold eyes. When she returned, Mr. Eugene was in the kitchen, somehow. He had rolled his wheelchair to the gas stove and tried to pour himself some boiling water. His hands were shaking. Claire ran over, but it was too late. The water spilled out, slightly burning his hands. She burst into tears. "Why didn't you call me?" He pushed her hand away, his voice hissing. "I'm not a burden to a teenager like you." They were both silent. Claire pulled out a chair, took out the medicine bag, and bandaged his hand. She said nothing, just sighed deeply. That night, he called her back, his voice hoarse. "Don't cook eggs tomorrow. I hate undercooked yolks." Claire smiled slightly, not because of the advice, but because he finally said something that wasn't a command. Claire prepared breakfast as usual, this time pancakes and grilled sausages. She remembered her grandfather feeding her this dish as a child, calling it the breakfast of the brave. Today, she made it again, as a way to mend things. When she brought the tray to the living room, Mr. Eugene was already sitting there, his eyes the same as yesterday, quiet and still as an old wooden statue. "Pancakes, like you used to make them for me when I was 6. Claire said, setting the tray down on the table. He glanced over. "I don't remember." Claire smiled faintly. "I remember." She cut a piece of pancake, put it on a fork, and offered it to him. He didn't refuse. That was rare these days. She sat down in the chair opposite, waiting for a reaction, but he didn't say anything. He just chewed quietly, then took a sip of coffee. He looked up at her. The look, for a moment, was no longer that of a stubborn old man, but of the man who had once taken her for a walk around the hills, explaining how to read time by the sun. Claire spent the morning cleaning out the shed, a room filled with dust, old wires, and boxes of family memorabilia. She found a leather-bound photo album, a picture of her mother in her 20s. Her long hair tied back, smiling brightly next to Eugene and her grandmother. She took the album into the living room. "Do you remember this?" she asked. Eugene didn't answer. He looked at the album as if it were something unfamiliar. Claire opened the first page, pointed to the photo. "This is Mom, right? At her high school graduation." "You want to rehash old history?" he said. His voice clipped. "I just want to remember the good things." He said nothing more. Claire flipped through a few more pages. A camping trip. A photo of him holding his camera when his mother was still alive. Then, suddenly, Eugene turned the wheelchair around and pushed it out onto the porch. Claire stayed behind, holding the album in her arms, feeling as if she had just ripped open a wound that had not yet healed. It was a light rain at noon. Claire made pumpkin soup, following her grandmother's recipe. She placed the hot bowl on the table. "You should try this. It's what Grandma used to make. And she loved it." Eugene picked up the spoon and tasted a spoonful. His face scrunched up. "It's bland." Claire was speechless. "I seasoned it exactly as Grandma wrote. I even looked it up in my notebook." "She must have written it wrong," he replied, coldly. Claire put her spoon down on the table. "Why do you criticize everything I make? I'm not a professional chef. But I'm trying my best. I didn't ask you to come here to serve me," he said, his voice rising. "No, I didn't, but no one else would. I quit school, my scholarship, my friends, just for you," Claire said loudly, for the first time. The room was dead silent. Only the sound of the rain pounding on the tin roof could be heard. Eugene turned away. "I don't need your pity." Claire was speechless. For a moment, she felt so angry that she wanted to pack her bags and leave. But then she looked at his hand, the hand that had poured her coffee, led her across the street, and held a hammer to repair a clock for decades, now calloused and trembling. "This isn't pity," Claire said softly. "It's love." Claire didn't eat dinner that night. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the rain-soaked yard. She turned on the camera and looked at the pictures she had taken in the garden, light filtering through the branches. A drop of dew on a leaf, her shadow stretching across the grass. Each picture was a place she had escaped to when the house was so stuffy she could hardly breathe. Eugene sat in the shadows behind him. No one knew he had come out. He didn't say anything either. The next morning, the sky cleared after 3 days of rain. Claire opened the windows, letting the cool late autumn air into the small kitchen. She sorted through the cupboards, looking for some leftover roasted coffee to make for her grandfather. When she pulled open the bottom drawer, she found a dark wooden box tucked deep in the corner. The lock was rusted, but the lid swung open when she gently pried it open. Inside were a stack of old letters, black and white photos, a few small notebooks, and an unopened envelope, the return address, Linda Matthews, her mother. Claire held her breath. The letter had been sent 8 years ago. She took the envelope and the letters out onto the back porch. Sitting in her grandmother's old wicker chair, her hands shook as she opened the letter. "Dear Claire, I know you will never forgive me. But if you ever read this, I hope you will at least know that I have never stopped thinking about you. When I left, I thought it was the only way to stay alive, but I lost you. Forgive me, if you can. Mother, Linda." Claire gently folded the letter, her heart feeling like someone was squeezing it. How many years had she waited for an explanation, a question, a sign? And yet this letter had lain quietly in the kitchen for 8 years. Never opened. Claire brought the letter into the house, placing it in front of Mr. Eugene as he watched the news with absent eyes. "You got a letter from my mother 8 years ago," she said, her voice no longer gentle. He didn't look at the envelope. "I know." Claire squeezed his hand. "Why didn't you give it to me?" "Because you don't have to read those lies. You don't have the right to decide that for me." Eugene turned, his eyes blazing. "I have the right to be the only one left with you." Claire stood up abruptly. "And so you chose to be both father and judge? You hid my mother, you tore up the pictures. You hid the letters, you ignored her very existence. I never had a chance to understand what happened." Eugene was speechless. After a while he turned away, looking at the old clock that was slowly ticking. "She chose to go. No goodbyes, no turning back. I didn't hide it. I buried it, like trash to be forgotten. And what about you? Do you deserve to be forgotten with her?" The question fell into the room like a thunderclap in the dry season. Claire left without waiting for an answer. In the afternoon, she went out to the hill to take pictures. The pale honey light covered the withered grass. The wind blew quietly, but Claire's heart did not. She raised her camera, then lowered it, unable to focus. She picked up her phone. It had a weak signal from the next town, and dialed the number on the letter. A weak female voice answered. It was a nurse. Linda Matthews was in a Seattle hospital, terminally ill with lung cancer. She wanted to see Claire. She said, "If not, at least tell my daughter I miss her." Claire said nothing. She hung up, her heart breaking without bleeding. Claire didn't come home that night. She sat under the wooden bridge at the village entrance, where the phone signal was strongest, and reread her mother's letter. She felt torn in two. One half wanted to leave, wanted to escape the gloomy house. The other half couldn't leave Eugene, no matter how cruel he was. When she got home, it was raining again. Eugene sat near the fireplace, holding his pocket watch. He didn't look at her. "I called my mother," Claire said. He still didn't turn. "Is she alive? I'm going to see her," she said. Eugene turned slowly. "To hear more apologies? I've heard enough for a lifetime." "No, you're wrong," Claire said, her voice firm. "Not to hear what she has to say, but to let me say what I've kept inside for 10 years. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat writing a letter by hand, in case she couldn't make it. "Mom, I've lived my life without you in silence. I want to say that I've never stopped missing you, but I've never forgiven you. If you want to see me, I'll come, not because you're my mother, but because I am me. Claire." Outside the window, the old clock chimed midnight. Claire folded the letter, feeling the door to her past open, but not knowing whether to step in or not. The sky the next morning was low and dark. A thick layer of clouds hung over the hills like a gray blanket. Claire woke to the sound of wind blowing through the window, the trees creaking in anticipation of something approaching. She went into the kitchen to make coffee for Eugene. When she put the cup on the table, she hesitated. "I'm going to Seattle, for a few days," she said. He looked up, looking at her as if she had spoken an alien language. "Where?" "To see my mother," she said. The air seemed to thicken. Eugene put down the cup. Not taking a sip, he pushed his wheelchair away from the table. Facing the window, Claire stepped forward. "Grandpa, I'm not going to blame you or hear apologies. I'm going, because it's my last option so I won't have any regrets." Eugene didn't respond. His lips were pressed together, his jaw twitching slightly. "Just a day or two. I'll leave some medicine and food. And ask Edna next door to check on you." "No need," he snapped. "I'm not a kid." "But you can't walk around if something happens. The rain's coming, and the phone's not working. Don't talk like I'm a burden." His voice was sharp as a knife. Claire paused, looking into his eyes, not backing down for the first time. "I never thought of you as a burden," she said slowly. "I thought of you as someone I loved, even though you hurt me the most sometimes." She went out into the garden, where the wind blew the yellow leaves under her feet. The wind carried moisture, the smell of dampness, and the feeling of rain. Claire went into the pantry, arranging Mr. Eugene's medicine in the drawer near the chair, posting reminders for when to take it each day. She noted each frozen meal, pasted microwave instructions on the refrigerator door. Though she was uneasy, she tried to make sure he was taken care of while she was gone. She called Edna Parker, her friendly neighbor, and asked her to come by every day. Edna agreed immediately. "Mr. Eugene doesn't like anyone but you. But I'll try," she said, half joking. Claire smiled slightly, but the smile didn't last long. In the afternoon, dark clouds gathered, covering the sky. Claire had just finished packing when the phone rang. "We're calling from St. James's Hospital," a female voice said on the other end. "Mrs. Linda Matthews, it's getting worse. If you can come early. Try tonight." Claire looked out the window. Rain had begun to fall. Drizzle, then steady. The first drops tapped the glass, a reminder that time was running out. She stood frozen, holding the phone. Tonight? In this rain? It was almost 200 miles back to Seattle. She didn't have a car, so she could only take the bus. The last one left town at 7 p.m. She looked at her watch. 5:10 p.m. Claire strode into the living room. Mr. Eugene was still sitting there, his pocket watch on his knee. He didn't look at her, didn't ask. "I have to go now, Grandpa," she said. "It's raining hard," he said dryly. "I have no choice." The rain began to fall harder, pattering on the tin roof. Claire bent down and took his hand. It was shaking, cold, and calloused. "You'll be okay, right?" she asked. Eugene didn't answer. "Just hang on for a few days. I'll be back, just like your mother said before she left," he said. The words cut through her like a knife. Claire stood up, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't answer, not because she didn't want to, but because if she did, she would scream, and she didn't want to leave in anger. She picked up her bag, put on her raincoat, and walked out the door. The cold wind slapped Claire's face like a slap. She ducked her head, pulling her hood tight. The path to the bus stop was muddy and slippery. The rain was no longer falling, it was pouring down, in torrents. Suddenly, she stopped in her tracks. For a moment, a thought rang through her mind. If something happened to him while I was gone. She turned. She looked toward the house, the old roof peeking out from behind the sodden trees. Claire clasped her hands, her tears mingling with the rain. Mom, if I don't make it, please understand, I can't let him die alone, she thought. Claire turned and ran back into the rain. Her shoes were soaked. Mud splattered up to her pant legs. It was almost dark when she got home. In the dim yellow light, she saw that Mr. Eugene was no longer in the living room. The wheelchair was empty. She threw down her luggage, calling out, "You." No answer. She opened the door, the wind howled. She saw the wheels rolling into the wet ground. The blur led out onto the dirt road, toward town. Claire shivered, her whole body frozen. No, it can't be. She ran out into the rain, following the wheel tracks, and her heart, for the first time, feared that she might lose him, for real. Claire ran through the rain, her heart pounding loudly, drowning out the sound of the rain on her head. The wind whipped at her face, at her eyes, blurring her vision, but she still ran as if something was pulling her forward, a fear she had never felt before. The tracks of the wheels on the ground were now erased in sections by the rain. But the traces remained, leading towards the small wooden bridge at the entrance of the village. She crossed the muddy field, the mud up to her ankles, her sneakers almost slipping off her feet. "Sir, please don't do anything stupid." At the foot of the bridge, Claire saw it first, his pocket watch, fallen in a puddle, the strap soaked in mud, the glass scratched. She stopped, her heart stopping. "Sir," she screamed, her voice fading into the sound of the rain. A soft groan came from the bushes to her left. She lunged forward, the wet foliage whipping at her face, tearing her sleeves. And then, she saw him. Mr. Eugene lay on his side on the cold ground, eyes closed, lips blue, hands clutching the wheel of the overturned wheelchair. Rain poured down his face, water running down his neck, soaking through his soaked cotton coat. "Dear," Claire knelt down beside him, arms wrapped around him. He didn't answer. She pressed her ear to his chest, his heartbeat was weak, sparse like the last tick of a broken watch. "Help, is there anyone?" Claire screamed like a madwoman in the storm. Claire pulled him up, trying to prop him up in the wheelchair. His body was limp as a rag, heavy. She shivered, her whole body wet and cold. Her hands slipped off the side of the wheelchair, digging into the mud. "Don't do this, don't let me lose you," she sobbed. A cruel despair gripped her mind. But she gritted her teeth, strained, lifted him halfway up, and pushed him back into the wheelchair. The wind howled like a whale. Claire pushed the wheelchair along the flooded street, the small flashlight on her phone flickering a pale yellow light in the darkness. Her breathing was ragged, every step was a battle. Then the light from the Parker porch appeared in the distance, Edna and Roy's house. The nearest neighbors. Claire mustered the last of her strength and rushed to the door. Knocking like crazy, the door swung open, light poured out like magic. "Oh my God, Claire, what is this? You fainted? I can't," she gasped. Roy immediately ran out, carrying Eugene inside. Edna helped Claire up, giving her a towel and a blanket. "Put him in by the stove," Roy said, his voice urgent. The little house was filled with warmth. The fireplace was red, and the smell of burning pine filled the air. Claire sat shivering, watching him as he was placed in an armchair near the stove. His shirt was removed, a warm towel wrapped around him. Claire took his hand, still cold but no longer purple. "How did you know he was out?" Edna asked. "He pushed the cart to find me. I left, and then came back, and you were gone." Claire did not finish. She burst into tears. She could not stop. The tears were like a dam breaking. An hour later, Mr. Eugene stirred. His eyes opened slowly, blinking a few times before settling on Claire's. "Claire," he whispered. "You're awake," Claire said, squeezing his hand. "You scared the hell out of me." He looked around, as if he did not understand what had happened. Then his eyes fell on his hand, the hand that had been holding the broken watch chain. "You didn't leave," Claire continued, her voice choking. "You came back." Eugene nodded slightly. "I thought I'd lost you, like your mother." "No, you're here, and I still have you." A drop of water, whether rain or tears, fell from his eyes. as slow as the last second of a clock's hands. He tried to lift his hand and place it on Claire's cheek. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For the first time, I feel weak." "No, I'm not weak," Claire said. "I just started to let someone else love me." The rain stopped around midnight. Claire and he slept at the Parkers'. He was placed on the extra bed, wrapped in a warm blanket. Claire sat beside him, holding his hand tightly. She stopped crying. No thought of the missed bus. Only his steady breathing, like the lullaby of someone she thought she had lost. On the nightstand, the pocket watch had been wiped clean. Despite the scratched glass, the hands kept ticking. Tick, 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 tick. For the first time in years, the ticking didn't make Claire sad. It made her feel grounded. The next morning, pale sunlight streamed through the Parkers' wooden windows. Claire woke in the armchair beside the bed, her back aching, her body still cold from the rainy night. Mr. Eugene was still asleep, breathing evenly. His face was less pale, but fatigue was evident in every wrinkle. Claire got up quietly and walked into the kitchen where Mrs. Edna was pouring coffee. "You're okay," Edna said softly. "Little girl, you did something last night that not everyone can do." Claire didn't answer right away. She looked at the steaming cup of coffee on the table. "I just did something you should have known a long time ago. That you're not alone." 2 hours later, Claire and Mr. Eugene returned home. The sky was still overcast. The path was still muddy. But the old wooden house was no longer as cold as before. Claire pushed his wheelchair into the living room. He sat still, his eyes fixed on the old clock on the wall, ticking steadily as if there had never been a storm. "The clock isn't broken," he muttered, almost to himself. Claire nodded, putting her hand on his shoulder. "It's not broken, just needs someone to fix it." He looked up at her. And for the first time in the days Claire had been here. He smiled, tired, vague, but real. She helped him undress, wiping him down with a warm towel. This time, he didn't huff or whine. He let her do it, eyes half closed, breathing even. "Does it hurt?" she asked as she placed the sweater back on his shoulders. "No," he said, and after a moment of silence, added, "For the first time, it doesn't hurt when someone touches me." Claire squeezed his shoulder, her heart sinking. She didn't know what hurt more, the rain last night, or the loneliness he'd endured all those years without anyone touching him with real affection. That afternoon, Claire went into the shed where she'd found her mother's letter. She pulled out an old wooden box, wiped the dust off, and opened it. Inside was an old film camera, a Kodak Retina, with a half-shot roll of film still in it. Claire picked it up, looked through the viewfinder, and saw herself, small, tired, but no longer alone. She took the camera into the living room and handed it to Eugene. "Your old camera, right?" He blinked. "I thought it was lost." "No, I'm just not ready to look back." Eugene slowly reached for the camera. His hand was shaking, but he held it steady. "You used to say that photographs are the only thing that can make time stand still. And I still believe that," Claire whispered. At night, when everything was quiet, Claire sat beside him, reading aloud to him. The fire was blazing, the soft light casting shadows over the two figures, old and young. Once at odds, now sitting side by side like two wounded children learning to mend themselves. When she reached the last page, he said, "Claire, yes? You make me feel that living a few more years is worth it." Claire smiled, tears falling silently. It turns out that, in the end, love isn't about never falling. It's about having someone waiting for you to get up. The next morning, the sky was clear after the storm. The oak leaves glistened like 1,000 tiny shards of glass. Claire opened the windows to let light into the still chilly house. For the first time since she had returned, things seemed less heavy. She set the table, prepared oatmeal and some thinly sliced apples. As she wheeled Mr. Eugene to the table, he looked at the plate and nodded silently, no criticism, no complaint. "I remember you used to like apples," Claire said, her voice as light as the early autumn wind. "Good memory," he replied, chewing slowly. "My grandmother used to peel apples for me every morning, thin as paper, but never broke in the middle." Claire smiled. "Like you do." He looked up. "Like you." After breakfast, he gestured to Claire to push him over to the antique clock. The sunlight shone through the round glass, making the pendulum glint on the wooden floor. "This clock," he said, "is the only one in this pile of old things that still works." Claire looked down at the dial. "And it's never off by a minute." "That's not true," Eugene said. "Sometimes it's off, but I always set it. Every morning." Claire turned to look at him. "Just like everyone else. Off, but you can fix it." Eugene didn't answer right away. After a moment, he said softly, "I used to think regret was a sign of weakness. And now? Now I know, regret is the only way old people like me don't die alone." Claire sat down across from him. An emotion she had never felt before welled up in her heart, a tenderness for someone who had hurt her. That afternoon, Claire was sorting through her camera when Eugene called her into the bedroom. She walked in. He was sitting in a chair, holding an old leather-bound notebook. "This is your grandmother's diary," he said. "The last time I read it was over 20 years ago." Claire took the notebook. The first page was written in soft handwriting. For Eugene, who never said, "Thank you," but loved in his own way. She read a few paragraphs. Each line was a simple memory, a meal, Claire's birthday, Eugene getting drunk on cider, and times when Grandma felt lonely because he was so quiet. "She knew you loved her very much," Claire said. "Yeah," he nodded, "but I never said it." Claire looked at him. "Maybe you should try saying it for the first time. Not to her, to someone who's still here." Eugene looked at her, his eyes deep as ancient wells, quivering with something that had never been revealed. Then he spoke. "Thank you, Claire." Claire froze. The words, so simple, so naked, but never once in her life had they escaped his lips. "Thank you, for not leaving me. For coming back in the rain. For being here, even though you were not easy to love." Claire pursed her lips, tears welling up. "I stayed," she whispered, "because you were the only part of my memory that I didn't want to lose." That night, they had dinner together, no tension, no silence, just the sound of spoons hitting bowls, the old clock striking 8, and occasionally, Mr. Eugene telling a little story about the old clocks he had repaired. 2 years later, Claire stood in front of the wooden house nestled among the old oaks, where the mud had been marked by the tracks of wheelchairs and the rain had washed away all the distance. The cold autumn wind blew through her collar, carrying the smell of rotting leaves and memories that had lain dormant for a while. She held the key in her hand. The key was small, black, and cold like a piece of frozen time. The old door opened, making a soft squeak on its hinges. The house was empty. No more wheelchairs, no more grumbling, no more Mr. Eugene, who had sat in the sun, silently watching the old clock swing. Claire stepped in, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Every corner was still the same, but everything now had a nostalgic color. The dining table still had the scratches she had made when cleaning. The kitchen cabinet still had a note that said, "Oatmeal at 7 a.m., no sugar added." Those small traces, no one cleaned, as if time had cleverly frozen the last day he was here. Claire approached the wall clock. The clock was still there. The pendulum had stopped. She looked at the dial. The hands read 3:17. Claire held her breath. That was the time he had woken up that stormy night, after she had found him under the bridge, cold, purple, seemingly never to return. At that moment, he opened his eyes, and for the first time, held her hand as if holding a string that held him back to life. Claire went into the old bedroom, opened the wooden cabinet. Inside was the small wooden box he had used to store his pocket watch. She opened it. The watch lay still, clean, the glass still scratched, but the hands still moved slowly. She picked up the watch, put it around her neck. The silver chain touched her skin, cold but gradually warming with her body temperature. He was gone, but he left time behind, not for her to retreat, but for her to move on. Claire stepped out onto the back porch. The wind blew through the oak trees, sweeping the yellow leaves down like rain in time. She took a letter from her pocket, a handwritten letter, written to herself 2 years ago, when her mother had died shortly after that rainy night. In the letter, she had written, "I didn't make it, Mom, but I learned to love someone, when there was no time to complain." Claire stepped out onto the patio. The sky was pale blue, a few white clouds drifting slowly like memories that had not yet faded. She locked the door. The lock clicked, small, but like the end of a beautiful sad song. The bus pulled up to the end of the street. Claire took one last look back, then got on. Claire's story will continue. Thank you for listening until the end. What do you think of the story? I would love to hear your opinion. See you in the next story. Team Daily Unexpected Stories.